Hi everyone, welcome to my review of Stanley Kubrick's Lolita in 1962. Of course, here we are now finally opening, using the set behind me, on this channel. It's been on display, I'm pretty sure, in every video I've ever done, and yes, here it is, out of the box, and of course, yes, this is amazing. My most prized possession really in my collection, of course. There are many faces, of Stanley Kubrick himself. It opens up, of course. Wonderful stuff here, and of course Lolita, and basically, yes, of course, because the previous films, I had on separate Blu-rays, of course, there's never really been a Kubrick collection where they're all, kind of the 11 main ones at least, are on it, combined, so it's kind of annoying, but yes, this film is one of the least popular Kubricks, and of course, very, very controversial, sensitive subject matter, and at the time, of course, it was very hard to get this made, and the remake, I have seen, hated it really, I think it's really bad, and actually, Kubrick was the one who really went about, this whole kind of very controversial and risky stuff, he went about it the right way, and the new one, the I think it was 97 one, Jeremy Irons gave a good performance, everything else just didn't really work for me, and it was too much. And this one, of course, yes, it was actually the last film of the 11, main features that for me to see. I saw it last year for the first time ever, and I actually, I didn't really know what to expect. I thought, who knows? I was not, massively thinking The Killing would be a masterpiece. Because not much people really talk about it. Very, very low on the rankings. And yeah, I didn't expect, an instant masterpiece. But yes, this one, I kind of went in the same way. Although, Stanley Kubrick up to this point had never disappointed me. I think absolute genius. For me, the best filmmaker of all time. Even though he's only, the 11 films that I've seen of him, I mark it on that. That's enough for me, considering how good all of them are, to call him the greatest for me. And the highs of his career, well, we'll get to that. But for me, pretty much the greatest ever in cinema. This film, Lyon, basically plays Lolita, and of course, in the book, she's meant to be the character is meant to be around 12 and a half, of course, yes, she was 14, the actress that played her, when it was, started production, and 15, I believe, when it wrapped up and everything, so yes, it is very, very controversial, of course, and it's basically, of course, the story of this, English professor, who's about to teach French literature, he basically, for the summer, before he goes into teaching, he's basically, he wants a place to, to stay, and, in order to write and everything, and just kind of, it's basically a place to stay, so he finds, he comes across this house, near the beginning, after the kind of prologue, which we'll get to in a minute, and of course, Charlotte is the kind of, you could say, desperate, woman that kind of, really wants him to take this, offer, as she keeps showing him around the house, and it's hilarious. The first thing I noticed about this film was the comedy. It's so much, greatness there. The script is just so good. Of course, rewritten, I believe, by Kubrick and Harris, of an original, kind of 400-page, I believe, script, and stuff. And of course, the book was made in '55. I believe the author came in to kind of write the script, and it was rewritten. So yeah, Kubrick, but uncredited, but basically, yes, Kubrick, and Harris wrote this, and yes, but this script is just so good. The comedy always lands, despite this being very, very disturbing, very controversial, and kind of twisted, a twisted story, revealing, some of the most disturbing stuff, really, that people can do, and of course, yes, the comedy is just so good, and yes, I was just finding, the kind of comedy within this kind of setup already just hilarious. Of course, everything in this film, performances as well, just so funny at times. And yes, he gets shown around, and he kind of declines at first. He's hesitant to stay in this place, and kind of stuff. Even though it's quite a nice location, but then when he sees Lolita in the garden, he takes up the offer and he says, "Yes, I'll take it." And of course, the film unfolds from there, of course, exploring, really in a nutshell, obsession. That is really what Kubrick approaches this film, in the way he does it. It's kind of like, you can compare it to Vertigo, or of course, not in that sense, but it's basically, it's not really about the erotic stuff, although I think, that's obviously mainly to do as well with censorship and stuff. But look at the 90s one, that went into that route, and it really was actually worse. Not just for that, there's no comparison. It's not really a good film. This is Kubrick we're talking about. He knew how to make, a masterpiece, and for me, another one of his masterpieces, and actually not, the worst Kubrick film of the 11. I actually think this is better than Past Glory and The Killing. That's how good it is. I absolutely adored this film, and it really was an emotional one. Very disturbing, of course, very, very disturbing. And actually, there's a character in this film, Claire Quilty. Yes, it's not going to be a spoiler review, but it's very, very clear. You'll catch on to it when the first few scenes is in, that he is basically, as is a manifestation of many of the traits of Humbert. Of course, the main protagonist. The same sort of stuff goes on, but in more of a twisted manner. And actually, you find out that, not completely confirmed, but really it kind of is, that he's actually doing even worse things there. What happens there is some of the most disturbing stuff in a Kubrick film, which is saying a lot, and stuff. And yes, basically, it explores, the approach is to explore obsession in general, and it's not really graphic stuff that goes on, and it's just is this. And the character, of course, it's stuff that, of course, is disgusting, and all this kind of stuff. But Kubrick approaches it in a way, very particular way. It's not just a one-sided film. Of course, you can't just make, and for it to be a great film, you can't just make the main character, completely one-sided and have no complexities and stuff, because that's just not how cinema works. I don't have to explain that kind of thing. But James Mason, of course, plays Humbert, and he is absolutely outstanding in this film. The performances really are stunning. Sue Lyon is really, really wonderful. A great performance, great child performance, of course. It just really is just amazing. I think it's a very, very hard role to play, and she absolutely perfected it. Of course, everyone else involved. Peter Sellers is absolutely astounding in this film. Of course, the very opening scene, Kubrick kind of twisted, jumbled up a little bit of the kind of narrative, where he kind of it's kind of like a thriller. It's introduced as, and of course, at the beginning, Humbert shoots Claire Quilty. He goes to his mansion, shoots him. So it sets things up very, very differently to how a lot of the rest of the film is, especially the first half. Of course, it's more of a family unit kind of course, exploration of obsession, but really, it's kind of something very, very different in the first half after this scene, the sequence. And yes, basically, he sets this up so wonderfully, and then, of course, that shows up later in the film. I'm not going to say when, and it comes together wonderfully. This film, I think, it's very, very disturbing, and of course, it's such a risky film, but really it is actually a perfect film for me. I think just the way, objectively, just the way that kind of Kubrick moves the camera, you could kind of say this is little flourishes, really, of his kind of his Doctor Strangelove cinematography. A lot of the staging is actually noticing it again. Very, very similar at times. Peter Sellers, of course, in Doctor Strangelove as well, and actually in this film, he plays, you can kind of say, different personas, different characters, disguise and everything. He is one of the most pivotal things of this film. Of course, actually, it was more emphasised than the book was, and yes, basically, he really, really nailed it. All the different kind of characters that he plays. Just wonderful, really is. Of course, Sellers is just, for me, one of the greatest actors of all time. Certainly comic actors, and in this film, there's moments where he's constantly on the case, of Humbert, and getting in the way of things with the narrative, and just it kind of adds something, so kind of engaging, and kind of the tension within the narrative. And of course, you're wondering constantly as well. I kind of forget sometimes around the 45, 50-minute mark, where he's out of the film. Forget about Quilty, really, and then he shows up again, and you kind of think, oh God, yes, that was the opening scene. Yet we're so invested, we're so caught up and kind of intrigued by where this film is going, that you kind of forget about all this other stuff. It's so focused, this film, on this kind of central relationship. Of course, Charlotte as well, plays a massive role. But as the film goes on, Humbert, comes into power more over Lolita, and it kind of becomes a very, very intense study of kind of controlling nature and everything as well, abuse in general, and of course at the same time, just in general obsession and kind of of course, very very disturbing. But Kubrick approached it in such a way. Performances are so particular and so precise, and the tone of the film as well. That it really is so sincere. It's not one note either. And of course, this character of Humbert, of course, yes, despicable in that sense, of course, the obvious reasons. But of course, he's given, of course, different human, traits. So he's fairly complex. Of course, on the surface as well. It kind of delves into how people at first can appear, charming and everything, and actually deep down, twisted in that sense. And of course, stuff that is disgusting. But of course, how kind of the trickery involved and the kind of deceit that is involved. That's what Kubrick plays into here, and James Mason portrays that perfectly, of course, as well. The use of music is really, really stunning, very emotional actually as well. And yes, the cinematography, as I've said, the editing, it's flourishes of Doctor Strangelove, and you could say Doctor Strangelove is really the first one where, and certainly 2001, where really Kubrick, as really I think of him, really, really came into play in terms of the way his films feel, they look, and just the whole overall kind of visual style of his films came into play. Doctor Strangelove really is the first one of that, purely 100%. And this one is slightly earlier, I'm not going to say stepping stone, because this is for me on the level of Doctor Strangelove actually, this film. But yes, a slight, kind of, it's a kind of direction in that sense, and it's got, of course, the offbeat kind of camera angles, very, very disturbing. More subtle than these later ones in that sense, but really, really disturbing. The way he places the camera, different angles, the cutting, just the kind of perspective at times, the way people are in the foreground, very particular kind of facial expressions, people in the background, just very, very disturbing and atmospheric stuff going on in this film. They kind of, as I say, it's very, very similar at times to Doctor Strangelove. And yes, Peter Sellers actually, his character is kind of little hints as well of the kind of disturbing and just very, very, kind of the intensity really of some of his later films as well. But yes, this film, of course, not everyone will love this film. Some people will hate it. It is one of the most, kind of the least popular Kubrick films. But for me, it's an absolute masterpiece, and actually definitely not, Kubrick's worst film. And yes, of course, you've got the kind of the first kind of act of the film, excluding, of course, the prologue, which is something entirely different. It's kind of more of a device to set the film up. But yes, this film, kind of has this very, very tranquil, eases you into the film in the first act of, kind of thing. Things happen that are very, very, big events around the 50-minute mark, really, and then things start to change. It becomes more claustrophobic, more kind of, more of a thriller, more intense as the film goes on. The performances really are amped up, and of course it becomes more and more focused and kind of on an emotion level, much higher. Of course, very, very, as I say, very twisted, very disturbing. What Humbert does, very controlling, of course. It reveals all this kind of stuff, and as I say, the character of Quilty, look out for that. But really, really, the second time, this is my only rewatch so far. Even more so, it's just so disturbing. You can kind of see, once you've seen the film and you see all the different things that happen with Quilty in the film, you can see things very, very differently, and it's even more disturbing. Something that's really, really affecting. Kind of what happens there is so disturbing. It really is. The things that are just hinted at as well, that kind of goes on, and more is kind of given at the end, near the end of the film, and stuff like that. But yes, James Mason, of course, is just absolutely monumental in this film. Such a kind of complex portrayal of this character, such a complex character, the way it's done in this film. And yes, this film, it's just something that every single second is so, as a piece of cinema, drama and everything involved. It is so compelling. It really is one of the most engaging films I've seen. It's so intense. It's so kind of disturbing. Everything raises many different, issues, very highlights them all. You know, and of course the obvious ones, but very very subtle ones underneath as well. And it's just, of course, a film that is just a truly human film. It's a tragic film, you know, it really is, and of course, it's a one where you're constantly kind of making sure you really want, of course, Lolita, the character, to just get away from this. And yes, it's just at the same time, of course, you're given this protagonist of Humbert, who has all these different, you know, negative, of course, disgusting things that he has, you know, in his mind. And yes, you know, you kind of it is, of course, tragic at the same time as well, because of the way it's presented, and it's just, in that sense, purely because it's a great piece of cinema, because it's so balanced out. Of course, the drama, the comedy, you know, just all the themes in this film, just everything so well balanced, and of course the use of music is absolutely stunning. The cinematography is perfect. It really is, so precise, and yeah, it just feels like a very very epic in scope. You know, this is a great thing about most Kubrick films, you know, excluding maybe Doctor Strangelove and stuff. You know, you feel you at least get the most out of them. They're quite, you know, they're not usually short films. Luckily for me, you know, you get the most out of them. Barry Lyndon, of course, Spartacus, even 2001. You know, all these films, and Lolita. It's just, you know, he made very few films. 11 main films really. 13, of course, counting the first two. And yes, you should think it's a shame he didn't make more, but at least you get kind of a lot out of these films. Of course, Eyes Wide Shut as well. Even though you had to wait a long time, you know, in between some of the films, especially, of course, Full Metal Jacket, Eyes Wide Shut, which I can't wait to review. Of course, the later films, you know, more controversial maybe. You at least got the most out of them because of the, of course, how epic they are in scope, and he takes his time to build up these relationships, to kind of introduce these themes and then explore them so thoroughly, in such balanced ways, you know, such sincerity, that really it is the work of a genius. For me, the greatest filmmaker. Although this is not, you know, again, top 5 films, we'll get to them you know, pretty soon. I think it is a masterpiece, and I was absolutely blown away the first time I saw it. Just shy of the top 100 films that I have seen, you know, my favourites, you know, personally. It really is, and it's kind of on the level of, you know, another one that's very, very acclaimed, much more so than this. And of course, for me, it gets into my plus tiers. This is one of the greatest films I've ever seen, although not, of course, top 5 level, very, very top tier Kubrick. I think, you know, most films aren't, even ones that are made by him. But yes, I think this film is a masterpiece. It gets into my plus tiers, and it gets 100% plus. Tier 2. This film is perfect, in my opinion. Of course, I understand, you know, it's not, definitely not for everyone. Some people just never watch this film because of the subject matter. But really, I emphasise this is not handled in a kind of in a poor way. For me, like the remake was, unfortunately, you know, that's how it kind of, this film could have gone, you know, and it just wasn't. This is perfect for me. The remake is just really quite, it's just not approached well. You know, I think just it didn't approach the story well. It wasn't, you know, well directed really for me or anything, or most of the acting and stuff as well. It just wasn't that good. But yes, this film is definitely a perfect film for me. I think the characters and all their complexities, everything in the filmmaking is just perfect for me. The use of music as well, as I've said, the theme, for, you know, the Lolita theme, and just the whole kind of scope of this film, but how personal it is, you know, and how kind of focused this narrative is, and how it builds and builds. Very Hitchcockian at times in the second half of the film. You know, many scenes where they're getting followed and stuff. It's very claustrophobic thriller at times. And you know, there's definitely there's just so many great sequences in this film that just constantly come flowing. I think every scene is masterful, really, for me. I don't have any flaws with the film, and yeah, I'd, of course, with controversy, I don't think this is the worst Kubrick film. You know, many people say this, maybe Spartacus at times, you know, possibly The Killing, but really, this one I don't think is the worst, and actually it's close to my top 100 films of all time. So yes, thanks for watching, of course, and I cannot wait to review you know, the later Kubrick films Doctor Strangelove next, and then we skip ahead, of course, to A Clockwork Orange. Yes, very, very much looking forward to that. Rewatching that, of course. Wait for that. That will be a special review, probably a very long review, actually as well, a very personal review. But yes, this film is a masterpiece, no doubt for me, and yes, I would highly recommend it. Many people probably wouldn't have seen this compared to the other Kubrick films because of the subject matter, but I definitely say it's not handled poorly. It's sincere. It's done in a human way and in a kind of a clever way. Unfortunately, unlike the kind of the remake, and it's just a work of genius. This film. So yes, thanks for watching my review.